I'm Maria Brenton. I'm actually the lead director of the UK cohousing network for senior cohousing. And I've worked for a very long time with OUCH, the older women's cohousing community. And I'm a member of a mixed gender senior cohousing community forming also in North London. For my sins, I'm coordinator of that too. And I'm trying to apply the lessons that I've learned over long years with OUCH to the group that I'm now in. I've studied senior cohousing mostly in the Netherlands, but I've also visited cohousing in Italy, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and the United States. In much of continental Europe, cohousing flourishes. In the UK, it really doesn't. And that says a lot about our system. There are roughly 18 intergenerational cohousing communities in the UK, and there are no senior cohousing communities as yet at all. There are 3 or maybe more, 3 nearer completion than the 12 that are trying to get into shape at the moment. The 3 are the Bridport community down in Dorset, the Featherstone community, about which you'll hear more later, and 4 actually, older women's community, and then Cohousing Woodside, which is my group. I found the debate very interesting so far, and it has all sorts of resonances for me. What I think I would say is that cohousing is a form of utopian community that is on the more structured end of things, particularly if you're old. The older women's group with whom I have worked for, now this will tell you how difficult it is to deliver in this country, 17 years. 17 years. It started from the work I did in Holland. It will move into the building that is, we've got the ground floor up. It will move into its new building in February next year, and that will be 18 years in the making. In the housing world, very incestuous kind of world, I've often caught scurrilous comments like, there's got to be something wrong with OUCH, that it's taken them so long. They're too fussy, they're too this, they're too that. What I say is OUCH was born before its time, and British society didn't recognise it and is still struggling. The group that I'm a member of has been going for about 3 years, and I'm hoping that won't be 18. This present moment, if it ever happens, I shall be mightily surprised, although we've worked very hard on it. The senior cohousing model is probably even on the more structured end of structured cohousing. If I think about what the older women's group has done, they've had a long time to do it. And they have majored on creating social capital. If you asked anybody what the difference was between, say, a block of flats with older people in it, sheltered housing, a street with lots of older people in it, and the OUCH group, the OUCH group is organised, they know each other, they know where they're going, and they have worked very hard to share common values around that and to work out ways of getting there. Comparing them with my own group, I would say that OUCH is tight cohousing and we're loose. I'll explain that. It's really important for this group of older women, aged between 53 and 86 currently, 26 of them. Very important that this works. This is their last home. They're planning their last home. They've done communes, they've done squatting, they've done shouting about who didn't do the washing up or clean the bathroom, done all that. They want a life which gives them all the good sides and leaves the bad sides of anarchy and everybody hanging it out and doing what they like behind them. So they have quite a tight, I mean, they've evolved over the years, a membership procedure where you have to come to a certain number of meetings, you have to attend their groups, you have to make a formal application on paper, and then you are interviewed by two of the group, who then make a recommendation to the whole group, which then decides whether you can be a member. Now that's quite tight. My own group can't do that. We let anybody in who shows half a notion of understanding what cohousing is, partly because we're under a time pressure. We've been told that our practical completion date is May 2017. If we haven't got everybody to buy in by then, the Housing Association will sell our units to anybody, or any remaining units to anybody. And as we've carefully planned ourselves in a sort of rectangular form to be that community, that would be fairly undesirable. So we haven't got time to groom a group, to go through all those procedures, and we're taking a big chance. And I mean, the usual process of self-selection out happens. I mean, we've lost probably 6 in the last 2 weeks, 6 members. They self-select out. Nobody pushed them. They couldn't deal with the uncertainty. And that's one of the biggest things you've got to cope with in co-housing in this country is uncertainty. The Ouch Group has a renewal procedure every year in November when they have to pay their dues for the forthcoming year, which is about 70 quid or so. They have to work in threes. They call them triads. I haven't told them that those are Chinese gangs with axes. But they work in threes, and they do each one does a self-evaluation of how do I understand co-housing, what have I contributed to the group in this past year, and what will I contribute to the group. Now, that was actually the product of, they've had 3 or 4 sessions over the years on diversity and equality. And the idea was that rather than try and push people out who were totally unsuitable for the group, saying, I mean, you can't just say, well, I don't like you. That's not what co-housing is about. But what they could focus on was behaviors. Your behavior is unacceptable in this group. Everybody thinks so. We give you 3 months to get it right, or you need to think about your position here. And what evolved from that was this renewal process every year where they kind of recommit and say, you know, I've been this and that and the other thing, and I contributed whatever. And that, I mean, I'm always stoking them up to be brave enough to say, well, actually, you arrive late for every meeting and you didn't deliver on this, that, and the other thing. But I don't think they're that brave. Anyway, it's a much tighter process, and we will have to evolve that a little bit in my group, but only when we've got everybody safely snared and in. And it might be disastrous, but we're under such pressure from the London housing market, from the Housing Association. We don't have the luxury of taking our time over it and evolving those processes. So there are different types of co-housing. One is developer-led. The Stroud Group was developer-led. Some guy with some money bought a piece of land and persuaded other people to buy into it in shares. Now, before that happened, I was firmly convinced it would never work. I'm a bit on the glass half empty side, my personality, I'm afraid. I was sure it would never work because he was so dominant. Actually, has worked very well. Stroud is a very good co-housing community. There were enough strong people there to withstand the dominance of the man with the money. And he's still living there as far as I know. Is still alive, not killed. And it's worked. And, you know, it can work. The second model is group commissioning. That's what the Lancaster Group did. It's what the Lilac Group in Leeds has done. They got all the money together and they commissioned people to build it. And they kept control of it all the way through. The Community Project in Sussex did the same. It's a recipe for nervous breakdowns. It's very, very stressful, but it can work, and it has worked. And there are 3 successful groups to prove it. And if I had a preference, I'd go for that every time, because the group itself is in control and has the power. The third model is one that, as a network, we tried to persuade housing associations that a natural 21st century role for them might be co-production with their end users. The role of the housing association in Holland and Denmark has been very proactive, progressive. They have been the main engines of helping groups create co-housing communities. A very different culture in Holland and Denmark than here. The housing association in this country, the larger it is, the more it is challenged by a group of people who think that they're equal partners in co-production, who think they ought to have a say on where they live and how they live. Not entirely true, because I'm involved with two housing associations, one very large, one very small. The very small one has worked with the Ouch Group all the way through from 1998. They weren't a developer, they were finding us other developers, and we've been through more housing associations than I've had hot dinners, to be quite frank. All tinkered with us for a few months and then lost interest. The group is moving into a site in Barnet next year, which is the 4th serious site that they've lost all the others. But their affordable housing in it will be managed by this small housing association called Housing for Women, which is very small and which gets it. Gets the fact that the group will be self-determining and will control its own decisions and will do allocations and stuff like that. So not all housing associations are top-down, bureaucratic, controlling, etc., but some of them are. The difficulty of doing co-housing in this country and creating what we call an old-fashioned community of the future, is the system itself. It's knocked in the housing world as, caricatured really, as the middle-class, wealthy, privileged, gated communities who want to keep everybody else out. Actually, the system doesn't allow you to do much else. There are a number of co-housing groups in the country who have wanted to be socially inclusive and to include people who didn't have equity and needed social rents. And it is so difficult to do. There is only one mixed tenure co-housing group in the whole country at the moment. That's a very small one of 14 units, the Threshold Centre in Gillingham in Dorset.
We will go.
And you are Mandola?
Mandola.
Great, lovely. The Ouch Group will be, but the only way we have been able to provide a third of its units for women who don't have equity, who need social rentals, is to get a large charity to bankroll it. We couldn't get grant. The group itself didn't have the resources to cross-finance. In other words, the purchasers weren't well enough off to also fund 8 flats for people who needed to rent. The additional problem was that we had a local authority which held the whole project up for 2 or 3 years anyway, because they didn't want older people moving into their borough in that part of London. And that is the case with many local authorities. If you ask any of the sort of private sector, McCarthy and Stone people, whether they find it easy to build for older people in different local authorities, they will tell you no. 60% of their applications for planning have to go to appeal because they are refused, because they are older people. And an appeal can cost you £100,000.
And yet, sorry to interrupt, I was actually in a discussion group with a guy from McCarthy and Stone. He said the vast majority of folk that move into their schemes come from a 5-mile radius.
Yeah.
It's not even
Yeah.
authority moves.
Yeah.
There's that fear of more money, more support.
Yes. The older women's group, we were told that social services wouldn't want them coming to increase their numbers by 26 because they would make demands on the social care budget. So fortunately, we haven't had to negotiate with the local authority about nominations. In Haringey, where my group is, we would be very welcoming of people on social rentals, but we've agreed with the Housing Association that the obligation to have those will be delivered on the rest of the big site that we're part of, because Haringey would not agree to any kind of deal with us as a co-housing community, which meant that people who came to our intentional community would be those who chose to, and who we also could check out that they knew and understood something about co-housing. They said, you'll take just the people off the top of our priority list and you'll put up with what we send you. The Housing Association said, we know that will wreck your co-housing group, so we will not include social rentals in this group. So that's a big headache to be addressed. It's probably worse in London. In fact, if there's any worse place than London to try and create co-housing, I don't know of it, with all the land prices and whatnot. So, the fact that we're middle class and have got equity, well, I mean, 70% of older people, for instance, do own their own homes. My own view is, to quote Frank Field from about half a century ago, use the sharp elbows of the middle classes to plough a furrow that other people can then take advantage of. And that's what we're trying to do. So, the core values of co-housing are these. I'm sure it's just a matter of emphasis. You look at an eco-village, it probably is co-housing, but their main purpose is being ecological. In many co-housing groups, the main purpose is being a community with each other and friendly neighbours and making up for the deficits of society, but they're also interested in being ecological more and more these days. So it's a matter of emphasis, really. The different types of co-housing community are already in this country. I mean, you can have one that is a community of interest. Haven't met one that sort of shouts at me as dominantly having a community of interest like an ideology. They tend to be non-ideological, really. The main divisions are between being intergenerational and age-specific, and I believe that older people particularly should have the choice of either. We get criticised every now and then. Why are you making an old person's ghetto? Well, frankly, the age group 53 to 86 is intergenerational. I mean, the women at the high end of it are saying, well, these women are the same age as my daughters. And I think older people should have the possibility of saying, right, we've done children, we've done teenagers, we like them, we love our grandchildren, but we like it when they go home. And we would like a relatively quiet, peaceful environment. Why not? If they love children and they like the stimulus and blah, 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 then there are intergenerational groups that they can choose from. The whole question of choice, particularly vis-à-vis the public sector in this country, is fraught with difficulty, by the way. All the way through the years, when I've given talks in London, where there were, say, local authority people involved, I could guarantee that the very first question I would get would be, how can you justify giving people choice of who they live with? On public money? They should go where we send them. It's against equal opportunities and the law for you to be able to choose who you like and who you don't like, because you'll choose people like yourself and you'll keep out the people that you don't like. I say, we're trying to build a social entity that works. and you have to have a degree of shared value compatibility. And why not? Don't you choose your neighbours as far as you can? Don't you go check out a neighbourhood before you buy into it? Why should people on social rentals not have the same privilege? So there is a sort of poor law-ish ethos that quite dominant in the public sector in London particularly, where there is much pressure on housing, I have to say, so that it kind of explains it. But it's coming back anyway, isn't it, in a big way in this country?
I think there's an issue, sorry to interrupt, but there's an issue of deserve, isn't it? There's all the narrative about why should poor people be able to live here?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
the house costs a lot,
Yeah.
as opposed to it's a community that they've lived in all their lives.
Yeah. And, you know, people like in the housing corporation say, oh, you co-housing people, you're just middle-class gated communities. We're only that because they make it impossible for us to be inclusive. No grants, no funding, and it's a very complicated process. This is one of the leaflets that the network puts out, and I won't go through all those bits, but it's snakes and ladders, and you do fall off. There's a lot of come and go, and building a group as a group at the same time as finding land, negotiating with a developer and a construction firm and whatnot, and getting the finance together is a hellish combination. It really, really is. And yet, one cannot afford to neglect the building of the group. When I did my research in Holland, there was one question I asked people. Can you say, is there something that you wished you'd not done or you'd done more of? Now you've moved in. And a universal answer was, we wish we had put more attention on building the group rather than on building the building. Because it was so all-consuming that they neglected generating the social glue and the cohesiveness and the social capital that makes a group work, because it does, as somebody said earlier, does not happen spontaneously. You have to work at it, and you have to be consciously working at it for it to happen. The first steps, practical issues, getting people together, finding a place to meet, sharing ideas, etc., seem relatively simple. Often groups don't get past those. You know, they're usually sort of, I don't know, boozy Friday night suppers. Well, why don't we create something where we're all going to run it ourselves and whatnot, and then a few more bottles of red wine later, they've done it. But it remains a glint in the eye for very many people, and it is exceptionally hard work. I say to the Irish group sometimes, my hair was black when we started. So formalizing your group, the usual things about websites, don't even have to say that these days. That's probably the chief way that anyone recruits into a group nowadays, through a website. You've got to get your money sorted. You've got to get your legal status sorted. There are tips from the UK cohousing website, network's website on all of this, and getting that kind of corporate sort of, whoops. Okay. The visioning and decision making is really, really important to spend time on. It's not something to neglect. I've got, for my own group, a weekend planned in August when the same guy who took Lilac through 2 days of strategy making and visualizing is going to come down to us in London and take us through. Because we're also busy talking about the key principles with the Housing Association and the money and the planning permission and blah, blah, blah. We haven't even got to know each other yet. And how do we know that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet? I said to them on Sunday, I really don't want to move in with you lot until I know that you want what I want. What's the point? So we have to sort that out. And, as I said earlier, we're under pressure on a timeline from the Housing Association to deliver everything. quickly. They're not under any pressure. I mean, they'll do it in their own sweet time. But it's a big challenge for us, and it's a lot of work. And bringing strangers together and creating some sort of social glue between them needs time and effort, and everyone starting from the same point, but they don't. So I cannot stress how important it is. The Ouch Group has done a lot of this. It's got all sorts of policies, from pets and noise, and their shared parking arrangements and their shared car arrangements and all this kind of stuff. They have worked that out and they've got it on paper. They might strike some groups as over-formal and over-structured. But we had a guest, my partner and I had a guest from a Santa Fe cohousing community just recently who said, you've got to get it right. We've got people who are saying to me now, 5 or 6 years in, I never agreed to that. I never said I'd do that. Oh, nobody told me. And, you know, it's pretty chaotic. So you have to sign people up to the most essentials. There's different types of cohousing. This is the Thundercliff Grange in Rotherham. It's probably one of the oldest communities in the country. An old 18th century building that will be hell to age in, I think. But, I mean, it's been a cohousing community for nearly 30 years. New build. This is Lancaster, Stroud. Most of them are new build. And then we're just as a network moving to the notion of retrofit. In other words, because it is so difficult to marshal finance and land and development and planning permission in this country, to take a leaf from where the Dutch have got now already, start where people are at, and create a co-housing community out of them without them moving house. So, give you an example. In Holland, a big block of flats owned by a housing association with older people in it. They were asked would they like to be a co-housing group. A flat that became empty was kept empty, become their common house for meals, etc. And they were shaped where they were into being more neighbourly than they had been. And that seems to me an excellent way to go, and is something that we will be pursuing in this country. But in Holland, they can go within 10 miles, they can visit a co-housing community and see how well it works. In this country, there isn't a demonstration example already there. Share the work out. There's usually a structure. Burnout is a constant phrase around co-housing. Little core groups that do all the work and everybody else comes in on their coattails. Works for a while, but people burn out and get exhausted. And getting a group to the point where people are saying, you're doing too much, let me take some of it, takes a while. But there are all kinds of structures that that most co-housing groups have evolved. This is the Ouch group and my group, with the architects planning the buildings that we're going to live in. I firmly believe the architects are really proud of their participative style. I firmly believe it hasn't made a heap of the difference to the design, but what it did do is bind us all in and give us a sense of ownership and belonging, and it really sort of gave people a lift. Group building. This is based on my experience with the Ouch group. They have their regular stuff. They have a sort of management committee. They have task groups for all kinds of things. The latest one is on relocation, to deal with the anxiety and the practicalities of 26 of them moving house into this building. They have a buddy system for new people, and they try and make sure that they rotate the roles and that there isn't a little power clique that stays forever. There's a lot of emotional intelligence in the Ouch group, I have to say. I'm very proud of it. And they deal with this kind of thing as much as they can, though they're not perfect. They've had formal training workshops on how to take decisions by consensus. They've had workshops on how to deal with conflict, and they've got a written conflict resolution policy that people are pointed to if they start getting stroppy. And then all this, really important, they have a social program little group as well, and in between their monthly meetings and their small group meetings, there's always something like going around Kew Gardens or going around to an art exhibition or going to the theatre together to build that kind of sense of belonging, really.
Sorry to interrupt.
So,
Have you got much more?
no, that's it.
That's it. Oh, fantastic. There you go.